Welcome to episode 36 of the Empowering Ability Podcast.
Welcome to the Empowering Ability Podcast, where we get you and your loved ones impacted by disability the information needed to live a full and meaningful life. Now here's your host, Eric Gall.
Hey folks, welcome to the podcast today. I'm your host, Eric Gall, and thank you to those of you who are returning to the podcast, listening to your second episode, or maybe this is your 10th episode or your 36th episode. And thank you to those of you who are new to the podcast for giving it a shot and listening. So last week, I promised a conversation with Peter Marks, the director of the Center for Conscious Care. And unfortunately, I wasn't unable to get that podcast to production this week, but that's okay. I'm bringing you a intro conversation on a lot of the concepts that Peter shares in his conscious care model. And this is a recorded conversation from episode 28 with Janet Klees, where we talk about the biomedical approaches that family groups are exploring in the Durham region, which includes diet and experimenting with different diets and seeing how that's impacting people with disabilities. It's looking at sensory integration and mindfulness and the impacts that's having positive impacts that's having in individuals and families' lives. So here's Janet, and she will share really a good introduction to biomedical or non-medical approaches. One of the workshops or groups that you mentioned earlier that I'd love just to explore a little bit was around biomedical.
Okay.
So can you just tell us a little bit more about that?
So we felt that families might want to, and they have told us they are very interested in coming together and thinking about their sons and daughters in terms of supporting them to have the best life possible using non-medicinal, non-medical, and non-behavior management interventions. That it's not that those things are never on the table, but maybe they would be better serving for the individual if other things were taken care of first. So what we do is we kind of try to look at the whole person, and we've done lots of studying. So we have a book list that we follow that we've developed, and we bring in people to talk to us from time to time, and we're just studying, we're learning together. So one of the things we've learned about is the impact of diet. Particularly it seems to be for people who have autism, but not solely. There's lots of other people with epilepsy have benefited. And so families are at different stages of trying dietary kinds of approaches. And so families who have tried it will talk to other families and say, when I took gluten out of the diet, when I took dairy out of the diet, you wouldn't believe the difference in A, B, or C. So people are really interested in that. So we had a naturopath and a nutritionist come in and talk about how to do that safely. We had some reading around that. So once people's digestive systems are in better order, then we can also look at sensory integration things. So we've had a couple of families who have had really good experiences with occupational therapists with a specialty in sensory integration, and really helping people to understand that link between anxiety and hypersensitivity to surroundings that don't match for them. And it could be people that are understimulated in some ways or overstimulated. And so, and Peter Marks will talk about this a lot. These ideas were probably introduced to us. We were open to them, but Peter was influential in saying, really pay attention to this stuff. Mm-hmm. So that would be the other piece, is the sensory integration. And so people are kind of buying those cheap little trampolines, and they're kind of experimenting with heavy blankets and really learning what it is to help people calm down and focus in. We've dealt with kind of mindfulness, and how do we bring mindfulness ideas and practice to our sons and daughters with disability. And that mindfulness practitioner we're using in our project has come and helped us be thoughtful about that. And we've had other parents come in. People are very, very interested in medical marijuana and what's that doing for people with epilepsy, for people, and a number of families have some licenses and are experimenting a little bit under the supervision of doctors. And other families are really eager to get that information. So we come together and say, what is it that we know? And so once people's digestive systems are in order, we do a better job at kind of managing their kind of sensory diet needs. We understand about the importance of mindfulness, not just for the person with a disability, but the people around them need to be calm and in the moment when they're supporting. When we get that all in order, maybe there still is need for a little bit of medication. Maybe there still is need for some behavioral approaches. And the only reason I say that is sometimes it helps all of the support people be on the same page. So it's not for the person with a disability, but it's for the team, right? And so they're much smaller amounts and they don't kind of dominate the person's life. So I'm not saying never to those things, but maybe there's more important things for us to address first.
Right.
So it's a group that talks about those things, learns together, reads together.
That's awesome. It makes a lot of sense, right? We're learning a lot about, humans, and if you follow someone like Tim Ferriss, for example, talks about like optimal performance. Things that he talks about are nutrition, exercise, mindfulness.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we think about all those same things applying to an individual with disability? They're still people, so think about it in the same. And same way.
A lot of what we're reading, and Peter was helpful for us to understand this, that many people that we're supporting who have autism, epilepsy, and other kinds of conditions are the sons and daughters of parents who have lots of allergies, lots of sensitivity to the environment. And so what our reading has shown us is if a baby is born just a little bit more sensitive because their parent sensitivities and the in-womb sensitivities, and they're born in a world that is more polluted than it ever was. And they're given vaccines, not that vaccines are, the silver bullet problem, but if a hypersensitive baby reacting to its environment is given, what I heard from 1992 on, twice the amount of vaccination material than babies prior to that. Some of these children might just react in really, really significant ways. And one of the reactions might be, this hypersensitivity and also digestive systems that don't work. So if you get kids and then young people who are constantly in distress and pain and not quite at their best self and their mind is fuzzy, and then you're applying behavior management strategies or discipline strategies, and you want them to calm down in the whole
right, and you're adding in medication or drugs, you're adding to that whole cocktail of what's
absolutely
going on.
So can we calm things down? Can we start at a biological end, which makes really a lot of sense to me? And there's ways of saying we tried this and that wasn't the issue, so we're going back to typical eating or whatever. But there's ways to give it an honest go. We talk a lot about how do you convince your kids to do that. What are the tricks and reasons and ways. But increasingly, we also have parents that say, with sons and daughters with significant disabilities, that are saying, I said to my son, when you eat this, you get sick. So we're not going to eat it. That there is increasing, you repeat that and go through it. People understand things when it's offered by people that they trust in genuine relationship.
Or, as a coach, what comes to mind for me is, how do you feel after you eat this? Right?
Yeah.
And getting that out of the individual rather than telling them.
Yeah.
There's a place for both.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, for someone listening to this, it's like, okay, I'm interested in exploring this more.
Yeah.
One thing that comes to mind is chatting with a naturopath.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah.
And obviously there's you've got the group that's exploring this. Do you have any thoughts on how a family could start to look at this type of an approach?
Yeah. So Peter Marks on his website will have some ideas on this as well. And certainly there are naturopaths, although they're not all equal. So you have to really kind of, you need to have ones that have experience in some autism and developmental disability. So they should automatically know that there are kind of things that they need to look into. If Peter Marks is doing any of his workshops in various parts of the province, people should just leap onto those. Again, we tend to have him out this way about once a year, and if people see him on our newsletter, they're quite free to sign up. Our biomedical group, there's a group that physically meets, but there's a larger group that reads and shares some of the information. So if people have an interest, I can share our book list, for example, and some of the other stuff that we kind of look about. I mean, I think the value really is in the conversation, but if people, I think we've got a pretty responsible list of books, is what I'm saying. Is it's not hugely radical. It's really kind of measured, and it's not going to put people in danger. But it's highly effective for great things to think through.
Okay, great. We'll include that list of with the show notes so people can access that.
That'd be great.
A big thank you again to Janet for sharing this great knowledge with us and what they're learning and what they're experimenting with in the Durham region. And as you could tell, I'm a big follower in Janet, so you were getting lots of content and lots of information shared from Janet, and I really believe in a lot of the work that she's doing. So keep your eye out for a upcoming episode with Peter Marks, and we will get into a lot more detail on the things that Janet and I discussed in this podcast. And Peter will give you some of the tools on the podcast to start to integrate these or start to experiment with these ideas in your life or a loved one's life. Next week on the podcast, we have Patty Scott. So in episode 34, you might have heard David Hasbury mention the organization Neighbors out of New Jersey, and his partner and wife, Patty Scott, leads that organization and created that organization from the ground up. So I have a great conversation with Patty to really explore her model with Neighbors and how they take the individual with a developmental disability and give them the control and empower them to have choice in their life and help them design their life the way that they want to live their life. And Patty talks about the principles and the values that Neighbors started with to enable people to live this type of a life. And she talks about how the system or the systems on how, or systems and principles of how other organizations or on how other organizations she worked in really were holding people back, and how she thinks we need to think differently and how she thought differently. And she shares that thinking with us. And I think it's so important. So a great conversation to listen to next week with Patty Scott, founder and CEO of Neighbors. And thank you so much for listening to the podcast today. If you like this episode and you think you know someone that would benefit, please share it with them. Be a part of the change to think differently about disability.
Thanks for listening to today's podcast. Visit us at empoweringability.org for more podcasts and resources to help you and your loved ones impacted by disability build a full and meaningful life.